So I've been thinking about this topic for a while, and in this session, I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts around the future research reporting from a client-side perspective. So last year, NewMR conducted research amongst report creators and receivers and delivered a number of webinars on the topic. So this session aims to build on that and some of the observations from reports I have received as a client, and some of the considerations and implications I think this might have for research teams. So we'll take a look at the current situation, why this is an issue, the challenges that exist in addressing these issues, and then ultimately the solution. So I'm going to propose some suggestions that agencies and report creators need to consider for the future. Now, let's just recap on the current situation of research reporting. Well, last year, NewMR conducted research amongst report creators and receivers, and the feedback was that essentially report creators think they're delivering this, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, functional, but also quite impressive. It's visually appealing, although when it comes to the Sydney Harbour Bridge, this has been debated. And it's also iconic, so it's very memorable. Now, on the other hand, report receivers think it's more like this, a slightly less exciting bridge. I can still walk or drive over it, but it doesn't look very great and it doesn't get me excited. It's also not very memorable. So if you ask me in a day or so what I remember about that bridge, it isn't going to be very much. There is also a discrepancy between report creators and receivers in terms of how they'd rate the quality of the most recent report that they either created or received. So the majority of report creators feel that the quality of what they delivered was either very good or excellent. Now, on the other hand, report receivers are less likely to rate it well and more likely to rate it as fair or even poor. So we've got a bit of a challenge on our hands. So why is this an issue? Well, as a client or a report receiver, you're likely to find that stakeholders are quite time poor, and this comes through when we see what some of the poor points of the reports were. So report receivers mentioned lack of insights, actionable recommendations, and business focus. They said the reports were too long for them to read through. They were too boring, they weren't engaging enough, they weren't visual enough, and they weren't deep enough. Now, this is an issue because if you're a time-poor client or report receiver, you really need your reports to get across the point clearly and concisely. And we're also finding that the communication of research results is becoming increasingly visual. And if that's done well, that can really maximize the impact of that research and insights and ultimately increase their usage across the business. Now, increasingly, you may notice that users of research are often not researchers, and they also typically have access to a lot of data. So the key for them is they need to understand the key points of the reports easily, and also how this information fits in with all the other information that they have available in their organization. If you think about the example of the forgetting curve, that the majority of information we learn is forgotten about 24 hours later. So learning is hard, so we need to make it easier for the information receiver to process and ideally retain that information. So now we'll take a look at some of the key challenges in addressing this situation and optimizing the reporting to better meet the receiver's needs. I'd argue that the challenge is threefold: the recruitment challenge, the time challenge, and the format challenge. So firstly, the recruitment challenge. I'd argue that we're not actually recruiting into market research roles always with the required skill sets. So someone that has great analysis skills doesn't necessarily have excellent data visualization skills, for example. And we can't expect everyone to be good at everything. We all have different skill sets. So if we want strong data visualization skills, for example, we need to start recruiting in a different way. Next, the time challenge. We operate in a time where deadlines are getting shorter, decisions need to be made quicker, And so market research reports often need to be turned around quicker than ever before. Now, in some ways, that can mean doing the same amount of work but in less time. Also, it arguably takes longer to produce something in a different way compared to the way that it's been done before. So that takes time to design and construct a different format rather than just simply follow the same format that you've used before. Now, this also has knock-on effects for the briefing process because it may actually take longer to conduct the briefing with your client, as you need to fully understand not just the business problem to be solved, but also understand their expectations from a reporting perspective. And then there is the format challenge. So the formats we have historically defaulted to are arguably becoming less relevant. So there's still a demand for these and they have a role to play, but this is changing. So clients more and more are expecting solutions beyond just PowerPoint presentations and Excel data tables. Now, it's also important to understand your audience, not just who your stakeholder is, but who are the end users that are going to be using that report. And it's likely that you may need to deliver multiple formats to meet the needs of different stakeholders. So you need to ultimately consider the shareability of the reports constructed beyond just the insights function within the business. So what's the solution? Well, I'm going to propose that there are three key areas: recruit different skill sets, partner with your clients, and rethink the deliverable. So firstly, I'd argue that we need to recruit different skill sets. It's not just good enough anymore to recruit someone who's a good market researcher or a good analyst. Someone with great analysis skills doesn't necessarily have excellent data visualization skills, for example. And we all have different skill sets, so we can't expect everyone to be good at everything. So if we want different skill sets, we need to start recruiting in a different way. Now, this isn't anything new because we've already seen the start of this in the growth in demand for data scientists, which was a job title that arguably didn't even exist 5 to 10 years ago. And that's an example of a role and a skill set aligned with a specific need. Perhaps it's about considering the structure of your business. So, for example, some agencies may have an in-house design team who can support with data visualization. So we've identified specific needs around data organization and analysis through the rise of data scientist roles. We might even need to think about data visualization, so perhaps recruiting designers into in-house research teams. Or do we even need to go one step further and rethink the role of the market researcher? Are we actually looking for data storytellers? Because it's becoming increasingly important for the skill set of the market researcher to be able to synthesize and interpret information from a variety of different sources, not just that primary data that that particular agency may be collecting. So while we're on the subject of storytelling, of course, it's not just a case of recruiting new skill sets into your organization, but also building up the skills of your existing team. So if you're looking to improve or develop your skills in storytelling, as an example, there's a range of different training courses as well as relevant articles and blogs that you can turn to for information to upskill yourself in this kind of area. And here are a few examples of some of my favorites. Now, a large part of the challenge we saw up front in the discrepancy between report creators and receivers in terms of how they would rate the quality of that most recent report that they either created or received is partly going to be a result of the relationship that you have with your client, how well you know them, and how you interact with them. Now, well-received reports are likely to have come from agencies who have developed a strong relationship with their client and interact with them in more of a partnership approach. And this does take time to develop. So to partner with your client, there's a few different areas to consider. You really can't underestimate the importance of the briefing process. So invest the time upfront to really understand the business issue and acknowledge that this may actually require more time than you would typically invest into that briefing process. It's also important to understand what good looks like. So be confident to ask for examples of deliverables that your client has received well, and also be open to and seek out feedback on the reports that you've delivered and whether they met the mark. And consider that you may need to adapt your reports to the audience. So different clients who operate in different markets, they may have different deliverable needs. So for example, if you've got a government client, they might require a detailed written report. On the other hand, if your client operates in FMCG, they're likely to want something a bit more concise. So ultimately, we need to rethink the deliverable. So PowerPoint presentations do have their place, as do data tables, and the demand for those is still strong. But we do need to consider that different stakeholders have different needs. And it's likely that the most impactful reports delivered are likely to be a mix of formats. You might have a PowerPoint presentation and data tables for a certain group of stakeholders, and then something more visual and simplified, such as an infographic, for another group of stakeholders. So think creatively, think things such as infographics, videos, vox pops, if relevant for the situation. So in summary, to improve the quality of research reports and try to reduce that gap between report creators and receivers, there are a number of considerations. The challenge is threefold: recruitment, time, and format. And the solution to be considered has a number of implications. You need to recruit different skill sets to your teams in the future, partner with your clients, and ultimately rethink the deliverable. So thanks for listening, and I look forward to any questions.